Hello and welcome to Aliens Revealed Live. I'm your host, Dean Caparella, here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. From alien abductions to monster-infested ranches to men in black, near-death experiences, close encounter experiences and more, we speak to some of the most amazing people on the planet ready and willing to share their chilling stories with you. And they all come from the Aliens Revealed Live files here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Well, the term star children has fascinated the ufology community for some time now. With more research being conducted, it's becoming apparent that star kids are real, and we need to begin taking notice of how humanity is changing as a species. Mary Rodwell is recognised as one of the world's leading researchers in the UFO and contact phenomenon area. She's the founder and principal of the Australian Close Encounter Resource Network, ACERN. Its primary role is to offer professional counselling, support, hypnotherapy and information to individuals and families with anomalous paranormal experiences. She likes to focus on abduction contact experiences. Rodwell said she believed humanity is changing based on her extensive research with almost 4,000 families and individuals. Rodwell says this new generation of star children appears to be quite different in the way they see the world and reality. Rodwell says because these star kids are different, they are being given different labels because of their view of reality is different. Their awareness and abilities are also different. And according to Rodwell, some of the labels these children are given by the spiritual community other than star children and star kids include crystal indigo, children of light, and golden children. However, it's what they are being labelled in the mainstream community that is cause for concern. Rodwell says she has followed the clues and patterns which began to emerge during her extensive research. They are clues and patterns that seem to keep repeating and were just too hard to ignore. One of the clues Rodwell picked up during her research at ACERN was from well-known ufologist and experiencer Neil Gould. Gould is based in Hong Kong and wrote the book Close Encounters of the ADHD Kind. It's described as one of the most courageous books written in recent times, dealing with, among other things, where we have come as humankind. And to talk more about this topic, let's welcome in Mary Rodwell. Hi, Mary.
Hello, Dean. Nice for you to invite me. Thank you.
Pleasure. Mary, you wrote a book back in 2016, The New Human, Awakening to Our Cosmic Heritage. Terrific book. Is humanity changing as a species?
I believe so. And this is because of my research with over 3,500 families and children globally. And what I'm seeing is these new generations of children appear to be quite different in the way that they see the world, the way they see reality. And I believe this is directly connected to being visited by non-human intelligences. And the connection of that is because many of the parents that I'm speaking to that have had encounters have children and they say they're different and they give them, different labels, but they're saying the way they look at reality is different and that their abilities and their awareness is different.
So are we calling them star children?
One of many names is star kids, only because the parents often have interactions with non-human intelligences, but they're also, in metaphysical terms, they're called crystals, indigos, children of light, golden children are some of the names they're given that the spiritual fraternity give them, but in more mainstream, they're often given the label ADHD, Asperger's, some forms of autism or dyslexia. So they're seen as a dysfunction, whereas my research working with information from molecular biologists and from other professionals is they're saying actually what we're seeing is a different upgrade of human, both physically different, in other words, their senses are heightened, such as their sense of touch, hearing, sight, etc. is all, if you like, expanded, but also their abilities, their awareness, what we call their awareness of the non-physical world, such as they can see energy fields, they can see sometimes spirits, they can see orbs of light, they can sense feelings and emotions. Some of them are telepathic, for example. And I write about that in The New Human because they also talk about their interactions with non-human intelligences.
So ADHD, Asperger's, dyslexia, forms of autism. So these labels are definitely connected, you feel, to non-human intelligences.
Well, the clue for me, Dean, was this. Over looking at patterns, because with this experience, we know that now from our surveys that 75% of it is non-physical. So when you see the patterns of the person having the experience, like the parent, and the parent will talk about their experiences, they'll talk about how it through their experiences they expand in their awareness, becoming more clairvoyant, clairaudient, their intuitive abilities, for example, are expanded. And then you find that you've got a child, or they find they've got a child that's labeled ADHD or Asperger's, and they're saying, why would I have a child if they are, if you like, expanding my senses? Why would they then create a child that appears to be dysfunctional? And over the years, I looked more and more about, from, if you like, the mindset of these intelligences. And one of the gentlemen that gave me a clue was Neil Gold. He's a ufologist experiencer in Hong Kong. And he wrote the book Close Encounters of the ADHD Kind. And he talked about when he was a kid, he saw reality differently. It was an expanded sense of the matrix, if you like. And he said, I knew I saw reality different to other people. And he said, so he retranslated his experiences as always dialed into higher dimensions. That gave me a clue, because the other bit with this, Dean, and you need to really go through the process that, that I talk about in my presentations, is what has been happening is over many hundreds of years, Western society has been educated into a mindset, a 3D mindset that says anything outside of physical senses is not real. We have it in psychology, the sciences, and it is a materialistic, mechanistic way of looking at reality, and us as saying we're nothing more than a physical body. But most of us will experience intuition, sensing, feelings, knowings that we can't quantify with our left brain. But because of our programming, we're inclined to look at that with distrust, inclined to look at anything outside of our physical senses as something that if we get involved with it, we're going to go crazy, or something's going to happen to us, because that's even what psychology says. Mm-hmm. Psychology says anything outside of your senses, you really need to look at your mental health or whatever. Whereas most of us now will recognize there are people that have the gift of seeing beyond the physical senses. We'll see spirits, we'll see orbs, we'll see energy fields, we'll become more aware of information that they haven't consciously learned. So the way that I looked at it was that we've been programmed into this mindset. These children appear to be wired differently, so they're not programmed into that mindset anymore. So they then can still be open to this ability that we all have, but haven't been programmed into the box, right, which many of us have been, where we question everything intuitively, whereas they are already naturally aware to that, and they're not being programmed back into that 3D mindset because of their wiring, because it's different. And what do we do with ADHD? We slow them down with Ritalin so that they can be programmed. And to give you a sense of one young lady who was 9 years old that spoke to me from Sweden, who basically said to me, when you go to school, you are programmed by the teachers. They just press the keys. In other words, they program you out of your light. In other words, they program you out of trusting your multidimensional awareness, your intuition, your sensing, your knowing. That awareness that we are all born with is basically shut down. And these kids are harder to shut down because they're wired differently. And that's actually an upgrade in terms of what my research has been showing.
Are these the same kids as the CE5 experiences that I've spoken to quite a number of CE5s over the last few days? Are these the same kids that go through those experiences?
Absolutely. What is happening is there are different programs of star seeds, star children, Homo noeticus. A molecular biologist in Sweden calls them letter people because she's one of them. She's a molecular biologist experiencer that was autistic, ADHD, and she actually did the measurements of how different we are physically, or they are physically, in terms of heightened senses. Many of them are highly sensitive to sound. They see more of the visual spectrum, for example, touch. And they're also sensitive to a lot of the foods. That's why a lot of them have the allergies and whatever, because it's about being, if you like, of a higher frequency and a higher awareness. We're seeing this globally, and I write about that in The New Human because I'm coming across children, 6 and 7 years old, that are telling me about who they are. Sometimes telling me, like a 10-year-old said to me, this is my first Earth incarnation. My last incarnation, I was on a planet. I was a blue being. Wow. And I've come to this planet to help with what's happening here, the pollution. He said, he chose his mother and remembers incarnating into her uterus, her womb, and realizing that he was in the right place. So they've got awareness of before they've even come here. They've got awareness of what their program is, or what abilities they have that they're bringing to the planet. That is absolutely fascinating when it's a 6 and 7 year old telling you this.
So these kids identify as human hybrids.
Absolutely. And they will tell you, I've just been writing an article on the science of the soul, and it was an 8-year-old that told me initially that his ancestors were the mantid beings, the praying mantis beings. Mm-hmm. They're his family, and that when he dies, he's going back to being a mantis because that's what he is connected to. He also told me not only that he was a hybrid mantis human, but he could communicate with animals. And he said, I've come here to help people understand that they're conscious beings and that we have to treat them with respect. Now, remember, this is an 8-year-old explaining this to me, about his understanding of his connection to these beings, these visitors that were called the gods of old, but in fact, I believe were all extraterrestrial intelligences that have come with their technology. And we misunderstood their abilities into a godlike thing, and so we call them gods, whereas in fact, quite honestly, I think all of them were very, very much extraterrestrial physical beings.
Okay. So this is part of a wider cosmic agenda?
Absolutely. Interestingly, one lady told me that she was taken up on board craft with the mantis beings, and they were showing her genetic engineering, not just for this planet, but for other planets, other solar systems, other universes, and told her that they were master geneticists. They were the master geneticists. Because one of the things, before people think Mary's lost the plot here, is my background's nursing midwifery. So I've got a medical science background, and I needed to see the tangibility of this. And the tangibility is in the fact that our DNA has evidence that we've been intelligently designed. And Dr. Francis Crick was one of the first to comment on the fact that he believed this was the case. There are anomalies in our DNA, not only he noticed, but other molecular biologists that have contacted me, but also other geneticists that say there is no doubt that our DNA, our genome has been altered, spliced and changed and added to. And so for me, that's the baseline of why they're interested in us, because we are part of them. They are our ancestors. So in effect, Dean, we're all hybrids, to be blunt. Mm-hmm. So, in the big scheme of things.
So would there still be people out there as part of this new generation that don't really know that they are an actual hybrid? Are they still unaware of their abilities?
There are those, because of the youth embargo, and you're very aware of that, I know, Dean, many people who first contact me are very cautious, very frightened. They are very wary about what they say about themselves because they think it's just them, because it's so different to what they believe everyone believes. And because they feel different, many of them say, I feel like I don't belong. I feel like, this isn't my home. I find, Earth and the populace very primitive or barbaric. They are kinds of strange feelings to have as a human. And then they say, and I don't know anyone like me. They don't realize that everywhere across the planet, there are those that feel exactly the same, but never talk about it because they don't want to be different. They don't want to be seen as weird or strange or whatever, because that's the big concern, isn't it, for most individuals, is they want to be the same as everyone, or at least appear normal, whatever normal is.
Yep.
And so I tell you, one that broke my heart a little bit was a 60-year-old man who, because I live in central Queensland, and he phoned me up, and he lived locally. And he said to me, I don't know what to tell you, but I've had some really strange experiences and whatever, and I don't know whether you'll be able to help. And I sent him one of my questionnaires. Within 24 hours, he rang me back, and he was in tears. And he said to me, Mary, how do you know about my life? And of course, I didn't, but I know the patterns. And he couldn't believe it, that all these patterns were what he'd experienced, but he thought it was only him. And he was a 60-year-old man. I've come across 70-year-olds and 80-year-olds that have said the same thing to me, is that they've always felt different, and they've never understood why until they realize that it's not just them, because they see these experiences getting validated by others that are having these experiences.
Wow. What is multidimensional awareness, and how is it associated with the new humans?
Well, we're all actually have that ability, which is to go from the 3D physical senses into our multidimensional senses. And the reason that we can access them is because that's part of our, if you like, the spiritual essence of who we are, our consciousness. Because the great thing with research now is they're exploring consciousness. What is that? And is it separate? Is it something that's separate from the body, like the soul, spirit, or whatever? Near-death experiences now, people who are having out-of-body experiences, astral traveling, etc. This is becoming remote viewing. All of these things are giving us some data on the fact that we're not just a physical container, that we actually have a soul or an essence or a spirit or a consciousness that can leave the body. As many people know, at night they go out of body, they astral travel. Some of them do lucid astral traveling, for example. So more and more evidence that we're more than our physical container. In fact, I'm writing about this at the moment. So if that's the case, what is this essence? What is this consciousness? And what we're discovering is that's the part of us that accesses the non-physical reality that physicists are now calling the quantum reality, or the quantum hologram of reality, which explains everything from intuition, out-of-body experiences, telepathy, all these things we thought were too hard to understand. We now have a model called the quantum hologram of reality that explains how we tap in through our consciousness to this non-physical reality or realities, because we've got, the scientists are now talking about 11 plus dimensions, for example. So we're realizing that our reality isn't just 3D, that it's multidimensional, and that we can access these other dimensions through consciousness, which isn't, although it's connected to the physical body, can travel from it and return back to it. And as we travel, we access information, but we also have the ability to access this information through our DNA. And the reason I say that is there's some Russian research now that has shown that the DNA itself has, if you like, can access the quantum hologram through miniature wormholes. The DNA itself will allow us to tap into the matrix consciousness and actually gain information from it. So, when people focus and are really interested in a particular subject and it becomes important to them, it's quite interesting, isn't it, about synchronicity. All of a sudden, everywhere they go, it's in front of them, and they wonder how that happens. Well, that happens because of our focus, that frequency or intent that's bringing that information to you. That's how it works. And you think, I didn't know, how did that happen? When somebody suddenly rings you up on the same subject, it's because of that frequency. So we our DNA that actually accesses miniature wormholes, but we also have our consciousness that can access this information as well. And this is what's being explored now through out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, shamanic experiences as well. Various healing now is activating that awareness even more. All of this is part of, I believe, our potential and part of what has been before thought about as dormant DNA, when in fact it's not dormant at all. It's just been misunderstood.
Another book you wrote, Awakening, How Extraterrestrial Contact Can Transform Your Life. I remember reading once Dr. Roger Lear described it as the Bible of the alien abduction phenomenon. So this must have been a real fillip for you. Was this what you had in mind when writing the book, for it to become like a guide?
Absolutely, Dean. When I came into this, the biggest thing for me as a therapist was, how do I support people who have got nowhere to go, no one, or don't know who to talk to, afraid to go to conventional help because they're afraid of being judged or thought as crazy. So all the questions that I kept getting asked by people across the globe, like, how do I know it's real? How do I know I'm not crazy? What do I do about the fear? What about my kids? What about implants? What about missing pregnancies? So basically everything that seemed significant to the experience that I put in a chapter of the book as a manual to help them through the process of understanding what's going on, getting validation that it's not just them. So it was a self-help manual, really, that was, as a therapist, was my best way of supporting those that didn't know where to go, who to talk to, because this is something you've got to be very careful about talking to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, for example. Some are open, some are not. And if you're not careful, you end up in a psychiatric ward. So that was the purpose of it. And it was literally, for me, a practical way of helping others that perhaps couldn't find another way to help themselves.
You were involved in creating the first abductee contactee support group back in the 90s. Did you see a need for such a group at the time?
I did. As it turned out, that after my first client in Perth presented, I still thought it was pretty rare. I had no idea of the numbers, etc. But within 2 weeks of the first gentleman arriving, a lady turned up with experiences and what have you. Then I met a social worker who was having experiences, and we said, well, you know, this is Perth. It's not particularly, you know, Perth. Then it wasn't a particularly big city. I wonder if there's others there. And I remember we did an advertisement calling it Abductee Support Group, and we put it in the paper, and there was a big funny in one of the newspapers, the Western Australian, I think, making fun of, oh, now there's a support group for those who have weird spaceship adventures and all the rest of it. But what it did was bring 12 people in the very first support group. That grew to 100 or more by the end of it. So this show, then I just thought, oh my goodness, this is huge, because that's still the tip of the iceberg of, I believe, the global contact that is going on all over the globe. And many people just don't realize what it is they're experiencing.
Still back in those early days, I understand that you were just a little reluctant to go mainstream with promoting this.
Well, I was considered fairly sort of normal, you know, normal counsellor, therapist. I was professional. I'd worked in a Catholic counselling agency, Silver Chain, doing grief and bereavement. So my background was coming from a very conventional perspective. And, you know, you're very wary of stepping into the more esoteric world, if you like, and the more fringe subjects. But at the same time, part of me thought, well, if this is real, and I soon got to the perspective that, yes, it was, then where do these people go? There's lots of counsellors for you know, as I remember my first client saying to me, Mary, there are support groups for everything, but for this, there is, you know, they just think you're a loony. And I thought to myself, well, someone's got to step up and support these individuals, because he was struggling, his partner was struggling, they were both being taken on board craft, the children were frightened, and none of the relatives would come to the house because they thought it was demons. And I thought, well, you know, what do? Do I abandon all these people that have nowhere to go Or do I say, right, there's plenty of other resources for everyone else? And that was why I created I wanted it to be professional. I wanted, I had all the counselling skills. I had got a good professional background. It really provided a safe place for people to come to me and get support. So in the end, it was like, what's more important? What I see as my credibility, or actually helping individuals. And you don't go into nursing, you don't go into counselling unless you want to help, and it's a healing profession. So that's what my motivation and always has been.
A lot of the people from CE5 that I've spoken to say that their experiences were pretty much benevolent and good experiences. What percentage of the people that you've seen and that come to your group would be traumatised by it?
Well, initially, it was the traumatised ones we saw, because the ones that felt it was benevolent, on the other hand, were really just looking at others that might be like them. They weren't, to them, it was a growthful experience. So, a majority to start with, I would have said at least half were traumatised. But what we've discovered in recent years with the surveys that the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Extraordinary Experiences free, 600 questions, 4,200 people globally were actually saying ultimately 85% of them found it a psychospiritual transformative experience, and only 15% were still traumatized. But with that 15%, Dean, I would say to you, some of those, probably a high percentage, might very well be the MyLab. And I don't know how much the public don't always know that there is another way people can experience an abduction, but it's not by extraterrestrials. It's actually by a shadow government, or if you like, military. They're military abductions, if you like, that traumatize them, and those ones are probably the most traumatic of all, and they're the ones that aren't necessarily ET. Yeah,
and that's a whole nother interview too, because we do hear quite a bit of that. Because I always wonder, why would so many people have a good experience and then all of a sudden another small percentage be traumatized by it? And then I wonder, was the trauma caused by the aliens themselves, or by the fact that the whole experience just caught them by surprise and just frightened them?
It's a good question. And the fear can come, first of all, because they don't know what's going on. Something's happening to them. It's out of their normal paradigm. What can I do? How can I understand it even? The fact they don't even know how to understand, other than they're terrified. They see the face and it scares the living daylights out of them, or whatever. So sometimes it's just because it's bizarre, it's unusual, they can't explain it, they feel out of control. Not necessarily goes with that they actually had a bad experience. And what I've done with many is they'll come to me with that fear base, but once we've explored the experience, that may change them 180 degrees, because they will see then what actually happened. And sometimes what's happened is they've had a healing experience. 50% of those surveyed with free had healing experiences on board craft, sometimes profound healing. That's another thing people don't know. Mm-hmm. So if it's gone from being terrified to finding out actually this was not to your detriment at all, in fact it was a very benevolent thing, that can change their whole understanding of themselves and the experience itself. But it can start out as being terrifying, especially if you suddenly see a being in your room and you've got no idea what the hell it's doing there and what is its intent. So sometimes fear is the unknown rather than actually what actually happened.
Yeah. Are we talking healing of the mind, or healing of, say, something like cancer or something really major?
Absolutely. It can be all of that. It can be healing from cancer. Preston Dennett, one of the wonderful researchers, wrote a book, 100 Documented UFO Healings. And these were ones that had been to the doctor, had the diagnosis, and then within a short time, sometimes overnight, they'll talk about being taken on a craft, had a healing done, and the next day are well. And that can be anything from cancer to really, less major illness. I've come across a number of people that have had profound healings, and they will say it was the ETs that did it. Even one lady told me that she went to the dentist, and he was saying, "Oh, you've got brilliant teeth, haven't you?" And she said, "What do you mean?" Well, he says, "Well, not one filling, not one amalgam filling." And she said, "But I've got several amalgam fillings." He said, "No, you haven't." So for whatever reason, the beings decided that amalgam fillings weren't right for her, and they'd replace them.
Wow.
And that was a one-off. I've never heard another one actually deal with the teeth. But this is the kind of thing that is profound, because how do you explain that?
How many people do you think are still out there that have kept silent about their experiences as an abductee or contactee and haven't come forward about it? Are we talking thousands?
More like millions.
Wow.
And the reason I say that, a lot of the ones that find it difficult to come out, the space closet, as I call it, is because of their professions. Usually it's ones that have got too much to lose professionally to come out and admit to it. I know MDs, I know nurses, I know social workers, lawyers, celebrities, etc., that have got a huge amount to lose if they start to say, "This is my experience." So, and that, even the everyday, farmer or housewife, it's still a big thing to admit to people that you're having this experience, because many of them really get a hard time, if not by their partners, by the extended family and people like this that saying, "Oh, for goodness sake, stop sounding crazy," or whatever. And that is why so many really keep quiet, because of the judgment that they feel society is going to display.
Yeah, I mean, judgment if they actually went public with it, but in a safe environment, I guess, even, with ACERN behind closed doors and off the record, I mean, just to kind of give you guys an idea of the numbers that are out there.
Well, the reason I've said I think there's millions is because my understanding is the reason that there's such a preponderance of sightings now, more and more people taking photographs, etc. There's a sense that this was a expanded program of contact. After we did the atom bomb, our technology got to a certain point. The sense there's a huge concern what we're going to do with it all, because we have the capacity to destroy this planet now. And so it seems like they've almost said we've got to have an accelerated program of expanding consciousness, so the human consciousness realizes the dangers of what it's doing and what have you. And this is why I believe it's more global, because what I'm seeing is a shift in consciousness. You know as well as I do, Dean, that things even 5 years ago, if you talked about this, it's a different ball game now, because something has shifted with a lot of people where it was very fringe. Now all of a sudden it's becoming more and more mainstream. More and more people are saying, yeah, we get it, that we're not the only ones on the planet. We have a limited disclosure now, where you've got a Navy, with the Navy coming out and saying, yes, these unidentified aerial phenomena, we don't know where they're from, but there is definitely something going on with this kind of stuff. More and more people are really owning their experiences, credible people that are owning their experiences. And I think that's really suggesting to me that the only way these intelligences can upgrade humanity is to actually target the planet and not just individuals. And some are going to respond to that call or that awareness more than others, depending on choices, I suppose. We always have a choice, don't we?
We certainly do. What's the common desire amongst those people that do come forward and come and speak with you? Is there a desire that they want to know what's happening to them has some sort of meaning in their lives?
Big questions are, why me? What's it all about? What does it mean? How much of it is real? So there'll be all those kinds of questions. So when they come to me, it may just be they want information. So I head them to anywhere where they feel comfortable and they will get validation of their experiences. I will give them a questionnaire to do so that I get a sense of what's going on with them. And then they may say, I've got all these questions. I've had missing time. I'd like to know what happened when I was 15 and, I was out and the journey should have only taken half an hour and I lost 3 hours or something like that. So they may want to explore that with hypnosis. So that's what we'll do. Okay, so what are the questions there? They also want to need to go through a process of integrating. If this is real, oh my goodness, this is real. Everything in my life's changed because now I've got to reappraise everything I've ever been taught, because we know, and I'm sure, as a good journalist, what we're taught. A lot of it is edited and isn't accurate. And we are lied to. We're lied to about our history. We're lied to anthropologically, archaeologically, biologically, scientifically, theologically, blah, 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 blah. Everyone has been edited. So what they start to do is go on this rampage of understanding, where they suddenly find themselves also focused on maybe physics or another area of study, because what this does is open people up to seeing what's resonant with them and what's not resonant with them. What is the truth? What is the truth? Who are we? What are we? All those things then. So they go through this process of reappraising what they want to believe or they feel now resonates with them. So it's a process of, is it real? If it's real, oh my God, I'm part of this. Yeah. What does it, and how can I integrate it without going crazy? Yeah. And, expand with it.
All right. Getting pretty close to time, but I just wanted to ask you mentioned disclosure before. So you think we're pretty close to disclosure, and if we are, and if it happens, how do you think the world will look post-disclosure? Will it look different?
I think that what we're having is a drip feed disclosure now. It's this, the Navy coming out and then more and more people starting to share. That's the one that the government is doing. But there's a far bigger disclosure going on. It's coming from the ground up. And these are people finally talking about, writing about their stories, sharing their stories on the internet. Credible people writing, as I say, more and more about what's happened to them in their lives around this experience and whatever. So I believe that's the groundswell of mainstream waking up and realizing that this is real. And that, I think, is the main thing that's going on in real disclosure. How's it going to change things? At some point, there's a tipping point where it's no longer fringe and it's mainstream and people are talking about, I remember going up on the spacecraft. I mean, the Japanese Prime Minister's wife talks about going up on spaceships to Venus and all sorts of things. I mean, so there's a Prime Minister's wife talking about it here. We've got a few politicians. We've got a lot of different celebrities that have been talking about this. That, I think, is the real disclosure, because it's people that credible people who are saying, you know what, this has been all my life. This has been my experience. I'm not round the bend. I'm not crazy. But how will it change things? I think there's going to then the governments are going to be pushed into being more truthful. But the big thing is, and you know this as well, Dean, is that once they realise that we have technologies from these craft and from these beings that will provide free energy, healing, a whole shift in how this planet is run from these technologies, I think people are going to get very pissed off that they've been lied to for 80 or 90 years. That's
the theory I put forward most of the time, is that I think anger will be a big part of post-disclosure. But a couple of people have said, no, it won't. I mean, people won't care. And I think they will care. I think they will. I
think they're going to be very angry that they have been lied to consistently for 80 odd years. And we've had technology to provide free energy where we're still burning fossil fuels and using, that are destroying the planet and have been when they didn't need to do that for example, all because it was about greed and about power and all those things. I think a lot of people are going to be pretty pissed off, to be honest.
Yep.
So they should be.
Yep. Mary, you've got a long list of achievements. You've packed a lot into the last 30 or so years, and just too long for me to go through here. But there's one thing that you did several years ago, and of course I missed it when it first aired because I've been living over here for 12, 13 years now. Your documentary on My Mum Talks to Aliens that you did with your son that aired on SBS. I thought it was a fantastic documentary. The concept was terrific. I was cheering you on all the way through. It was almost like a mini showdown with your own son, but the guy who tipped me off at the end was the guy right at the end, the skeptic at the university that you were debating. Just a smug, arrogant, typical type of skeptic. But I'm thinking, go Mary, take him down.
Oh, I think he's been taken down by a lot of really negative emails since that time, because he wound so many people up that, of the truth of this. And they face that rubbish. They face that derision and mockery and whatever. And I mean, I wish the gentleman well. I do hope a UFO lands on his head at some point, because that would be really, really nice. But this is still part of what people are facing, and my heart goes out to those that have had to face that kind of response, talking their truth. But I'm glad you enjoyed it. It was fun to do, and my son was very tolerant, but he did say to me afterwards, Mum, for a long while I don't need to hear you talk about UFOs. I think he was done.
Yeah. He looked done. He did. He looked done. But My Mum Talks to Aliens. I ran across it on YouTube, so if anyone's watching and they want to catch it, especially for those over, outside Australia that didn't see it, they can probably see it on YouTube, and thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, it's also subtitled in Europe, because there's several people from Europe that have seen it, certainly in Germany and whatever. I'm quite surprised it's gone done the rounds and whatever. But I think it's a nice, non-threatening way to see what people face in terms of judgment about something that they don't understand.
Well, Mary, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm sure we'll talk again soon, and I wish you all the best in your future endeavours, and let's bring it on and keep looking upwards.
Yeah. Thank you, Dean. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
That's one of the world's leading researchers in the UFO and contact phenomenon area, Mary Rodwell. Mike Merberg runs a strong CE5 group in Florida. An alien download can be interpreted as several things, but for popular Mike Merberg, it introduced him to the fascinating world of universal consciousness.
Well, I've had almost a lifelong contact. My history of contact is written about in Beyond UFOs, which was produced by FREE, the Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters and Extraordinary Experiences. I think it's chapter 10, as I recall. But things started for me early on in childhood, very early childhood, and I maintained contact for quite a long time. In 1979, I had a major contact experience with 50 other people up in the Berkshires, and I kind of, back then there wasn't an internet, and you didn't talk about those kind of things, and in 2015, October 3rd, 2015 to be exact, I had been translating some works and digesting some works by Niwa Ching, who is a Taoist master, and I had a very large orb appear outside my high-rise in Tampa, Florida. And we had a download experience, and I was lucky enough to ask it to stop so I could take some photographs of it, which it did, and have 3 very beautiful and iconic photographs. I basically said, look, nobody's going to believe this unless I can get photographs of this, and it told me, okay. And I kind of asked it to do some things, and it did. And that got me flying. I had no desire to make contact, but because I was in a what I would call a heightened spiritual state after hours of working on these works. Just like Stephen Greer. I didn't even know of him at the time, but Greer's first experience was after having meditated. A ET, UFO, UAP appeared to him, and it was a very similar experience. And after studying for years on this and lecturing at the UFO MegaCon last year, I also came across the Lotus Sutra, chapter 23, in which, lo and behold, the Buddha meditates and he brings in a UFO, which at the time that I read it as an undergraduate at Princeton in 1976, I took it as allegory and myth, and now I take it as a reality. You meditate, and you can bring these spiritual beings, these universal beings, as I like to call them, into your midst, and they're friendly, and they will communicate, and they communicate in many, many different ways. So that's what I do.
That's Mike Moberg, who says if everybody knew how easy this was, we could remove so much of the mystery from it, which is what he tries to do. This is an interview you don't want to miss. It's coming up on the next episode of Aliens Revealed Live Files. Thanks for being with us. Don't forget to check out our site at arlhub.com. That's arlhub.com. And as always, keep looking upwards and take care.